Hey everybody, welcome to the webinar, Goals for Agile Teams, OKRs. My name is Jeff Gothelf, and we are super excited to be here. Today I have my good friend, colleague, and Sense and Respond author, Felipe Castro with us. We are calling from two different sides of the Atlantic Ocean to join with you here today, but we're super excited to be here. I'm dialing in from Barcelona, Spain today. Felipe is based in Miami. I hope it's sunny there today, Felipe. Believe it or not, it's actually snowing here in Barcelona today. Which is
that's unusual, right?
I think the last time it snowed this much was in 2010. There's riots in the streets. There's no more milk and bread. It's end times out here. We're really excited to get started here, folks, and we've got a lot of content to cover and a lot of folks joining. So we're going to jump right into it. I want to start with a little bit of introductions about myself, Sense and Respond Press, and then Felipe, and then we're going to get right into the presentation here. So if you don't know me, my name is Jeff Gothelf. I am the author of Lean UX, co-author of Lean UX, and co-author of Sense and Respond. With Josh Seiden. Also, Josh Seiden, Vicky Olson, and myself started Sense and Respond Press late last year, which publishes short, beautiful, practical business books for busy executives. We're super excited to have Felipe as an author at Sense and Respond Press, writing his book, Goals for Agile Teams, really focusing on scaling OKRs throughout the organization itself. If you don't know Felipe is an OKR coach. He helps Agile teams across the globe on how to use OKRs to create alignment around business outcomes, which is key, instead of just features on a roadmap. He's trained thousands of individuals, and he's used that knowledge and that experience to create the OKR cycle, which is a simple method to avoid the most common pitfalls that organizations face when it comes to planning OKRs. And so with that, I just want to say thanks again for joining us today. I know it's different times all over the world. I'm going to jump right into it, let Felipe start telling us a little bit about OKRs, and when he's done, we'll come back and do some Q&A and discussion. Felipe, it's all yours.
Thanks, Jeff. Really excited to be here. And so, as Jeff said, we're going to have a short presentation on how to use OKR for Agile teams, and then we go into a discussion and then try to answer all of the questions if you can. So please send all your questions, okay? So most companies, they use Agile as a delivery mechanism. They use Agile for delivery only. And this prevents them from being truly Agile, to reaching true agility. And when you do delivery Agile, what happens is you simply replace the operational layer of your organizational stack. You remove Waterfall and include Scrum, Kanban, and maybe some experiments here and there. But the rest of the organizational stack is still Waterfall, right? So there's this Waterfall legacy that's in direct conflict with agility, right? The alternative, what companies today need is they need full stack agility. They need to replace Waterfall on all the layers of the stack, right? So they need to replace all those top layers of the stack with an Agile approach. So culture becomes working with aligned autonomy towards outcomes. Strategy is data-driven, is iterative, and hypothesis validation. Tactics works with short feedback cycles and allows teams to work with safe-to-fail experiments. But the thing is, to move to full stack agility, we have to reinvent how we use goals. Goals have been around forever, and companies are still using it the same way that companies did 100 years ago. And one of the key tenets of delivery Agile is the fact that you use Waterfall goals. You may use Agile for delivery, but the way you set goals, priorities, incentives is still Waterfall. But what are Waterfall goals? Basically, Waterfall goals are cascaded down, they're annual and static, they have a big design up front, and they're project-based. They're focused on output. So Waterfall Go, they have all the similar characteristics of Waterfall. Cascading goals is one of the most traditional ways to deal with goals. And there's a relationship between Cascade and Waterfall. They're synonyms. So you're trying to use Agile to deliver a Waterfall goal. Doesn't make any sense, right? What's the alternative? The alternative is to use OKR. I'm not going to do an introduction on OKR here, right? There's plenty of material on that. But OKR, it stands for Objective and Key Results. It's basically Silicon Valley's Agile approach to goals. OKR includes a qualitative description of the goal you want to achieve, which is the objective, and a set of qualitative measures, which are the key results. OKR is simple, it's fast cadence, and it's bidirectional. There's no 100% top-down in OKR. And OKRs are also set, tracked, and reevaluated much more frequently, usually in quarterly cycles. But OKR can be really hard, as many companies find out. Right? It's hard, but it shouldn't be. The problem is, for many companies, OKR represents a big cultural change. It means moving from features on a roadmap to outcomes, from top-down to autonomous teams, from silos to alignment. So there's a lot of cultural change involved. And there's an inconvenient truth about OKR. People often look to OKR and they think they're going to find a method, a step-by-step that you follow and you achieve your results. But OKR is not a method. It doesn't give you the rules or the steps to follow. OKR is more like a goal philosophy. So it's closer to Agile than Scrum or Kanban, right? And the consequence is that companies make the same mistakes over and over and over again. Right? So what usually happens when Agile teams try to adopt OKR at scale is that they make the same mistakes, right? So the first mistake is that they set bad OKRs. OKRs are usually so bad, you just don't want to throw them away, right? So what are examples of setting bad OKRs? First, teams often use OKR as a to-do list, right? They simply copy what's on the roadmap and put every single feature idea that they have, right? This is of course redundant and adds no value. Second, lots of teams create key results that are not measurable. There's simply an intent or a desire. It's impossible to track, so it's impossible to know if you achieve your goal or not. And finally, lots of teams creates lots and lots and lots of OKRs. Right? So if everything's the priority, nothing is. Right? So you need, OKR is about focus. The second big mistake that teams make is that they create OKRs in silos. They don't talk to each other. So what happens is they don't align with other teams, they don't map dependencies, so they end up with conflicting OKRs, low optimization, poor results, and it simply fails, right? So, and also not only they struggle to align with each other, they also fail to align with the corporate goals. They don't know how to do that. Usually OKR starts at team level, but teams don't know how to let it up to the corporate goals. And the third and also common mistake is that teams, they treat OKRs as New Year resolutions, a thing they just do once and then you forget about them. And of course, they get the same results you get with New Year resolutions, right? The fact is, without follow through, you have just a bunch of unachieved, neglected goals, right? To work, OKR has to be part of the company rhythm, has to be part of your daily routine, right? And another question and another mistake that teams commit a lot is that they don't know how to connect OKRs with the Agile ceremony. So they start adding more meetings and more meetings and more meetings, and that's not the idea, right? You need to connect those and make them work together. So what's the solution? Well, we need to give you a clear method, right? A step-by-step recipe for you to be successful with OKR, right? And that is what Jeff mentioned in the introduction, is the OKR cycle, right? I've been working with Agile teams all over the world for years, and I've been training and training and training. And after seeing the same mistakes over and over again, I decided that we need a tool, and it needed to be simple, right? So that's the OKR cycle. The OKR cycle has just 3 steps, and you repeat those 3 steps every quarter. Set, align, and achieve. You set OKRs that are valuable and outcome-based and engage the team. Then you make sure you map into dependencies and align with everybody. And finally, you work systematically to achieve them. So every quarter, you go through those 3 steps. But before getting to the details of the OKR cycle, we need to make sure we are on the same page about the basics, the fundamentals of OKR. We need to get the basics right? And one problem with traditional approach to OKR is that OKR has a third component that is often forgotten. Right? Most people will tell you that OKR is simply an objective, a description of what you want to achieve, and a set of key results. Key results, done the right way, they are how we keep score. Basically, you're saying we will know we're successful if those metrics move, right? It's your scoreboard. But you also have a third component, which are the initiatives. And that's what most people forgot. What you need to describe what you're going to do and what are hypotheses and your bets, right? Initiatives really help companies transition from tasks to outcomes, right? Because when you start using initiatives, it's like having 2 boxes on your mind, right? In one box, you're going to put your scoreboard. Okay, those are the metrics we will track. Those are the metrics that will show we are successful. And then I have another box where we're going to put things we think we're going to do, like, oh, we're going to run that experiment. Oh, we're going to try to launch that feature. So you're going to put all the bets, all the ideas you have, and maybe 1 or 2 tasks, initiatives that you have to do. Put them in the initiatives box, right? So you're going to separate how you're going to measure success, how you know if you're going to be successful from things you're going to do, right? It really helps transition from a roadmap culture, right? And as long as you don't mix them up, you'll be fine, okay? It also helps teams, they struggle with, hey, we know we're going to do this experiment. So they try to write a very complicated, very long and convoluted key result to include an experiment and at the same time include a metric. With initiatives, you just place it in a different box, in a different place, and then, hey, those are the things we're going to do. It will really make your transition to outcomes way easier, right? So I've talked a bit about initiatives, outcomes, mentioned output. So we need to make sure we're on the same page. We need to make sure we are using the same terms, right? Jeff and Geoff talk a lot about outcomes and output in Lean UX. And also Jeff Patton talks about outcomes and outputs in user story mapping, right? My description is a little bit different, right? But it's in the same overall philosophy, right? First, we have initiatives. Initiatives are the actions and deliverables associated to achieving your OKR. Everything you're going to do to achieve your either team level or company level OKRs, these are initiatives. Features, epics, stories, right? Projects, whatever. Initiatives are usually binary, meaning that yes or no, we delivered it or not, right? Then on top of initiatives, you have output metrics. Output metrics, they basically measure the volume or the throughput of initiatives they're delivering, right? Classic output metrics or velocity, measure the number of points. Service level agreements are usually also output metrics, right? They do not measure the value delivered, they measure you delivered stuff. That's it. They don't measure if what you deliver is actually valuable. Then we have outcomes where you actually measure the benefits you're delivering either for your customer or for your company, right? Outcomes are usually shorter term, so you can work on them in a quarter, right? And they usually contribute to impact measures. Impact measure, they measure the high level business performance. They're usually more longer term, like revenue or customer satisfaction or profits, right? So it's very important to understand the difference between those terms, right? And ask yourself, if you deliver all your tasks, you deliver all your epics and stories and projects and features and nothing improved, is your team successful? Of course not. That's why OKR is about measuring outcomes and impact. It's not about tracking initiatives. It's not about measuring efficiency metrics like velocity. Those are outputs. They measure throughput. They don't measure actual value, right? So now we can go into an overview of the OKR cycle. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you one actionable tip that you can use tomorrow and start using the OKR cycle, right? So let's start with the set step, right? The first tip I can give you, the first practical technique that you can use is that you should start with measurable outcomes, right? What do I mean by that? Usually when you have a traditional objectives and key results, right? What happens is usually you start with the objective. That's your intuition. Hey, you start with the objective first. But in fact, it's way better if you start with the key results, right? When you start with key results, it enables you to think about the outcomes you want to achieve, right? You start with the end in mind. Okay, what do we want to deliver? Which metrics we want to improve? So, and then after you have a list of those outcomes you want to improve, you have drafted your key results, you can create an objective that will make this OKR engaging and memorable. Just by flipping it, it will make your life way easier and way faster than simply trying to come up with an objective and then having a discussion. What does it even mean? Say we improve customer satisfaction or we increase engagement. And then you have a very long discussion about what is an engaged user. It's way easier if you start with the metrics first. Metrics are concrete and tangible, and you avoid all the subjectivity of simply a qualitative objective. Now, going to the align step, there's another non-intuitive tip, right? Usually, when we talk about setting goals, there's a very common advice, which is you should create goals that are controllable by your team, right? You focus on goals that you can control. The problem is that is terrible advice, although it's traditional, right? By definition, if I only work with goals that my team can control, any goal, any OKR that depends on other teams will be abandoned, right? So if you focus only on goals that you can control alone, it will create silos, right? And it will inhibit cross-team coordination. That is why the tip is you should align around outcomes and not structures, right? The idea is, imagine that you have several teams in your org, right? Whatever organizational structure you have, there's always white space between the teams, right? You can have functional, cross-functional, you can have squads, you can have whatever you're using. There's always white space between the transition between one team and the other. And the question is, who is managing that white space? Who's making the cross-team coordination happen, right? So align around outcomes, not structures, right? Don't assume you have a perfect org chart. Perfect organizational structure, they do not exist. Don't sweep your dependencies under the rug. They exist. So face them and tackle them. Yeah, there are things we need several teams, different tribes, different functions, different roles to work together as a team. So what you do is you align around outcomes and you use shared OKRs to create a common OKR with different teams. In a shared OKR, more than one team share the same objective and key results. They said that they share the same definition of success. They have the same way to keep score, but they have different initiatives. Each team will do different things to improve those metrics. Shared OKRs is one of the forgotten and most powerful tools in OKR, right? And getting to the last step in the OKR cycle, we have to achieve our OKRs, right? We don't, if you simply set the OKRs, even if you align them, unless you work systematically to achieve them, you will add no value and you will probably fail, right? So at the core of the achieve step is the fact that you have to create cadence, but it's not cadence in the agile sense of tracking deliverables. It's a cadence for tracking results, for tracking outcomes. So for that, we use the check-in, which is a weekly ceremony for measuring OKRs in adjusting the corresponding initiatives. Adopting the check-in is crucial to success, right? And it should be focused on improving OKRs. Lots of teams, they have weekly staff meetings, they have weekly teams, and they're basically putting out fires every week, right? And they never look at the metrics. The idea is that with the check-in, we flip this. We start with the metrics, we improve them, and then we can discuss whatever fire we have to put out that week, right? And the idea here is not to add more ceremonies, to add more meetings, but to merge the check-in with the agile ceremony, usually with the review. So instead of simply talking about what you delivered during that sprint, you talk about, hey, this is how our metrics change from last sprint from this one. And those are our new hypotheses. And then we will track them in the next sprint review. So you have a continuous conversation about what's working, what's not working, and you're validating your hypothesis, and you start measuring outcomes. And we include that in the daily and weekly rhythm of the teams. Now, a very common question, right? Okay, understood at high level what the OKR cycle is, but I'm not using OKR yet. How do we get started? So a few tips here, we get lots more in the book, but a few tips on how to get started with OKR, right? The first thing is, in the traditional approach, in the traditional approach, you have goals for every layer of the org, every level of the org. So you have CEO goals, VP goals, director goals, senior manager, right? So it takes lots and lots of time and it creates a lot of complexity. With OKR, ideally, what you use, you only have two levels, right? You have company goals and you have product team goals, right? Other functions that are not using OKR, but just using Agile, they're not working on products, they can do it differently. But with product teams doing Agile, the best approach to have just company goals and team level goals, right? And avoid creating functional goals. Oh, the head of engineering has one, the UX head has one. That's not the idea. We want a cross-functional team to share the same goals, the same OKRs, right? Again, they have the same scoreboard, right? If there's something that all engineering teams need to do, you can either have every single team include them in the team OKRs, or you can include it in the company level OKRs, right? This structure, I've worked with companies about up to, 1,000 employees. This works really well, and it really simplifies your model. The second tip is, and again, that's another thing that most companies got it wrong, is instead of doing a big bang approach, which is as anti-agile as you can get, do an incremental approach. Follow lean and agile principles, right? Learn every OKR cycle, right? So start small, deliver first the cupcake, and then the cake, and then the wedding cake. So start with some teams and then roll it out every quarter for more and more teams, right? I've never met a company that did a big bang OKR rollout and succeeded, right? It's really risky to do that. So do an incremental rollout and evolve and learn over time. In the book, we talk more about it, and we also talk about how do you choose where to start, which are the best teams, which is the best scenario for you to start. Okay. Another forgotten to OKR is the OKR champions. The OKR champions are change agents. They are like agile coaches, or in Six Sigma, they have black belts and green belts, right? So they are the focal points, the go-to persons for OKR inside your company, right? They help teams adopt OKR, select the results. They help implement the check-in. They help align between different teams, right? And it's fundamental that they are volunteers, right? And they choose that role, right? And if you do it right, if you select the right champions, you will increase your rate of success with OKR by 10x at least. What's important is OKR champions, they are distributed among the several teams, the several functions. They're usually not necessarily executives, and it's not the CEO, it's not the boss role. The idea is that we have several of them spread all over the organization to create the OKR culture. It's a part-time role, right? So it's not a new function. So it's not like you have an agile coach. It's simply another hat that people will use inside your company, okay? Finally, probably one of the biggest questions we get when we use OKR is, how do you scale OKR? Doing OKR at the team level is easy, right? I have a single team or two teams. If you follow the OKR cycle, it's easy, right? But how do I do that with 50 teams or 100 teams? How do you start to scale OKR? I have several different teams in different locations, different languages, different products using OKR, right? Here are a few tips. Again, in the book, we'll cover more of it. So a very common question is, okay, let's say I have several teams working the same large product, right? I can have like 7 teams working on a product here, 6 teams working on a product there. What do I do, right? The best approach there, as you start to scale, probably having only 2 layers, 2 levels of OKR is not enough, right? And then what you can do is, if you're working using with the Spotify model, using tribes and squads, you can create OKRs at the tribe level, right? And then each team can collaborate and contribute to that tribe level OKRs, and the tribe level OKRs contribute to the company level OKRs. The idea is to do it in a collaboration between the teams, and you don't cascade even inside the tribe, right? If you have large products, if you're using other frameworks, Nexus, Less, Safe, whatever you're using, if you have a large product with several different teams working together on that, create OKRs that measure the outcomes of that large product and try to slice it between the different teams, right? Ideally, each team will also measure outcomes, and those outcomes will be lead indicators or levers that contribute to the overall large product or tribe level OKRs, okay? So aligning at scale is one of the biggest issues, right? And the traditional approach for mapping dependencies is basically you get everybody in the same room. It's called big room planning, right? But there's a limit to how many people you can put in a room, and especially if you have people spread in different locations, right? Big room planning, of course, doesn't scale. We need something different, right? So what we need is, we need a distributed approach. You need to be decentralized, and you have to basically allow teams and give them the tools to map dependencies and align and create shared OKRs, right? So what we need to do is we need to ensure 360 alignment, right? We need to ensure that not only each team is aligned vertically with their bosses, the manager, the executives, but also horizontally with the other teams, and sideways and down. So that's the concept of 360 alignment. You have to give them the power to the team to do that and teach them how to do that, right? In the book, we cover a very good technique to do that. Finally, how to achieve at scale, right? One of the core problems that you have when you start to scale is that dependencies and impediments can kill you. So you have to be very aggressive in tackling and reducing impediments, right? During the check-in, the teams will highlight the impediments, and then you can scale that to escalate that to executives and others to help, right? So there are different approaches for how to tackle impediments at scale. There's a role called delivery manager, which is basically dedicated to solving and resolving dependencies. In Scrum at Scale, they talk about executive action teams that they eat dependencies, but executives, they solve dependencies for the teams. There's several techniques, but the thing is, unless you have a structured approach to tackle dependencies, you won't succeed at scale, right? There's also, there's also one tip here on how to handle OKR adoption at scale, right? This is a tip that I learned the hard way by making several mistakes. Unless you include OKR training in the onboarding process, what happens is you may have a perfect OKR rollout. Everything is fine. You are aligned, it's working. And as you start to hire more people, what happens is you start to have pockets or non-OKR usage and pockets of misalignment because it's like they don't speak the corporate language, right? And so I strongly recommend you to include OKR training in the employee onboarding. And if you're a high growth company, I strongly recommend it to be mandatory for new managers. Because when a new manager joins a high growth company, usually they have lots on their plate, lots of going on, and they try to skip the OKR training. Don't allow it to happen, or you will have pockets of misalignment, right? So that was the webinar. That was the text I had to show you, right? And now we can go into the discussion.
Nicely done, Felipe. Excellent work and a lot of detail in there. You got the folks fired up. They're chatting. They're submitting questions. We've got way more questions than we've got time to answer, which is a good problem to have. It gives us some ideas about what people are interested in, and we can actually email these folks because we've got everybody's email address with answers for the questions that we don't get to. I'm going to do my best to move around a little bit from the questions list and get you to kind of think through some of these ideas. Let's just jump right into it in the 25 minutes or so we have left. Felipe, what are your thoughts around cadences, right? So we talk about setting OKRs and reviewing them on a regular cadence, but if you work in more of a lean mindset, kind of a more of a, maybe even it's not in the question, but I'm going to say more of a Kanban mindset, even kind of when you're just kind of dealing with flow as it comes. Are there any special considerations for OKRs in those situations, right? Should you still work on a specific cadence, or should you adjust based on certain milestones or occurrences? When should you review your OKRs if you don't have that fixed sort of sprint or quarterly time frame?
Okay. I like Henry Nieberg's suggestion that he says that you should plan on cadence and release on flow, right? So that's what you should do. Because even if you're working on flow, you have to, from time to time, stop and say, what outcomes you want to achieve? Otherwise, you're simply delivering things out of your head, right? So still have some cadence, right? And usually, if you're working with outcome-based OKRs, and then 3 months is usually a good time frame for you to launch an experiment, iterate, adjust, and you have enough time to improve a metric, right? Usually, when I see teams asking for, hey, I want to do a month OKR cycle, it's usually because they're tracking output, they're tracking initiatives, right? They want to track features, and then if you're working with features, yeah, a monthly cadence would work. But we usually, if you're working on outcomes, a longer 3-month cadence is better.
Got it. Longer cadences. Terrific. Lots of questions here. Sorry, the more questions keep coming in and the questions keep moving. When you talk about implementing or introducing OKRs, how likely do you think it is to succeed with a kind of an undercover introduction of OKRs or a grassroots movement? Let's say you take a small department of 50 people or 100 people in a large organization of 2,000 or more people. Have you had any experiences kind of sneaking in OKRs with smaller teams and then kind of branching them out of the bigger org? And if so, kind of what's happened there?
Yes, definitely. That's usually OKR at a large org, it starts as a grassroots movement, right? It starts bottom up, right? Sometimes there's a CEO or an executive that wants to use OKR, but more often than not, it's a grassroots. So my advice is you try to get buy-in from the higher level that you can, right? So if it's the head of the department, if the VP, whatever, the highest level that you can get real buy-in. Real buy-in means that that executive will also be using OKR. Because one mistake that teams usually make is, yeah, we have buy-in from the exec, but the exec is simply think that OKR is something that they use. I'm not using that. So that's not real buy-in. So start with the higher level buy-in that you can get, the real buy-in. And also, you can use OKR at your level, right? But align the outcomes with your stakeholders, right? They don't need to learn about OKR. You simply say that, hey, I want to improve those metrics. What do you think? And if you start to align about outcomes, it's usually a good idea, right? And also, if you want to transition from a roadmap to OKRs, what you can do is you start having a conversation with the executives about, hey, okay, this is a roadmap, but how about we start measuring the outcomes every quarter, right? And then when you come to the next quarter, you say, hey, do you remember all the features we delivered? Let's see how we did. Oh, none of them actually delivered the outcome we expected. Maybe we need to change. So you start to have a conversation of measuring outcomes, and it's easier than simply jumping from one thing to another when you have the resistance. So align with, try to get real buy-in, the highest level you can, and align around outcomes. You don't have to mention OKR if you don't want to.
Got it. Yeah, right. Especially if it sounds like the new, like the new flavor of the month, right? And we just did Agile, or we just did Safe, or we just did Lean Startup, or whatever it is, right? Don't bother me with the new flavor, right? Yeah, call it whatever you need to call it, which is great. So look, one of the challenges that you talked about in the presentation about writing a good KR is moving it away from output from features, right? We all too often will see a KR that says launch feature X as the result to aim for, right? But that's, I mean, you could argue that it's measurable, right? It's binary, right? We either did it or we didn't, but that's not a good KR. When you see that when you see that someone has written a KR that says, and the success criteria is, the key result is we shipped the feature, or we shipped the app, or whatever it is, how do you get people to move to the outcomes conversation? How do you move that conversation from output to outcome so the KR is better?
Usually when you ask teams, hey, how many times have you launched a feature that nobody used? Yeah. I've never met an Agile that doesn't recall several features that nobody used, right? That's to throw it away later. So we started having a conversation, hey, let's talk about being successful. What success means to us? Is it launching a feature that nobody uses, or actually adding value to our customers, or changing customer behavior? So if you have a feature that you want to launch and you don't know how to measure the outcome, usually the exercise that I do is, if you're successful with that feature, what happens? What will change in either behavior or company metrics if this feature is successful? Oh, maybe we will drive engagement, or we will increase conversions, or it will make it easier to use, so people will take less time to complete that task. So if you talk about how you can measure the success of that feature, teams usually start drafting those key results.
Got it. Yeah, it's always good to say, like, if we ship this, how do we know that it worked? How do we know that it was a good idea? What if we chose the right combination of code, copy, and design, how do we know? Like, what is the, because one thing that I try to talk to with teams about is that there's literally an infinite number of combinations of code, copy, and design for every feature out there, right? And so how do we know we've chosen the optimal one, or the best one we can create with the time and people and materials that we have? And hopefully that starts to get into more of a customer behavior conversation. This one's interesting because I find this to be a real issue with the teams that I work with. So one of the things to make this successful is building transparency into the OKR cycle, not only for the teams themselves, but across teams, right? How do you start to make the OKRs transparent across multiple teams, let's say dozens of teams, 10, 20, 30 teams, so that folks are aware of all the kind of KR optimizations going on and aren't optimizing hyper locally, right? Because if you give a team a KR and they optimize for it, they may not care what's happening with these 5 or 10 or 15 other teams. How do we visualize OKRs across dozens of teams so that everyone's aware of what everybody's working on, and they're hopefully minimizing the amount of stepping on each other's toes, or perhaps poorly or negatively affecting each other's KRs?
Okay, the idea of the 360 alignment concept is that you should map dependencies and you should have a conversation about, hey Jeff, my OKR depends on you, or may I affect you, right? And we have a conversation. I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? And you're thinking about doing something else, and maybe I can adjust my OKRs to work with you. So you map all the dependencies, and basically what you do is you map all the teams that you depend on, and all the teams or individuals that depend on you. So you map dependencies both sides, and then again you have a structured conversation around it. And as you start doing that more continuously, you can do it really quickly and really well. And what you do is you make it visual. Okay, those are the dependencies. So those are the teams I have aligned with. And as you put it, this visual map of the dependencies for the whole company to see, other teams can help you spot misalignment. Hey, you should have also talked to Josh or Vicky, or you should have also talked to the payments team. Because as you do, since it's visual, the whole org helps you to map dependencies, and it gets faster and better over time.
Is there a forum that you would recommend? So let's say that we're doing that, and my team or the teams that are sharing an OKR realize that your teams, the optimization that your teams are doing towards their KR is negatively affecting us. Is there a forum that, generally speaking, have you seen any good kind of practice for raising those kinds of concerns?
Yeah, Google Sheets can help a lot with that, right? Using Google Sheets, basically, or you can use Confluence if you want. But the idea is you write down your OKRs with a way that's visible to everyone, and you also map those dependencies, right? So using a form with mapping dependencies is a good approach. I like using Google Sheets, especially if you're starting, I know, up to 500 or so. Even 1,000 people, you can start with Google Sheets. It's not the best tool, but it gets you started. After that, you can break it down to more forms and more sheets. But the idea is it's visible, and you also have to report who you aligned with. Okay, I'm aligned with Jeff is okay with that, Vic is okay with that, and the payment team is okay with that.
Got it. Okay, good. Yeah. So any kind of visualization, shared documentation goes a long way. Terrific.
Yeah.
Here's a really good question. So the first question I asked you was about cadences and how long each measurement cycle should take, right? And how frequently we should check in. We have a good question here, right? How do you deal with key results that can take a while to be proven? For instance, the person asking the question has a feature that she says, look, I have a few users right now, so it can take me a couple of months to get a significant traffic, to get any kind of significant results. And I can't let my team sit around for 2 months while we wait for results. So what should they align to while they wait? And then how do we circle back?
Okay. So what you're saying is there's a latency in the measurement, right?
Right. Yeah.
Very few users. It will take a while to get to statistical significance, right?
Yeah.
What I would do is I would work in different work streams and let it. Okay, this is an experiment that will take time, so let it flow and have your team working other stuff. A very good tip on that is when you're doing discovery work, have the engineers work in tech debt. There's always tech debt, right? And so you're wasting the engineers' time. So that is a valid concern. But you can also do is, hey, while this experiment is running, I can work in a second experiment, a second discovery stream, and then you give enough time for that to raise. Like you should have like a portfolio of experiments that are running and they're in different stages, right? That would a venture capitalist would do, right? You would have different companies and different stages, and that's it.
Interesting. Got it. And so then when the KRs come back, you kind of reassess what should be done next based on that, or is
something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
You could work because usually you can have more than one experiment at a time. Especially if you have a long latency one. So I'll let this experiment run. It needs more time, and I have different ideas. So I'll do discovery work with other stuff in between, and during the quarter I'll work with other stuff to achieve my outcomes.
Got it. So I've got a great question as a follow-up to this, because you mentioned product discovery. And so the next question that I have here, it says, look, how do OKRs fit with experiments, right? Particularly in greenfield innovation. So what should be the key result if what you're doing is running experiments to find out if the thing you're working on is even viable? For example, would you say that we've learned that it's a bad idea, like validated learning? Is that a KR? Is that a good KR? Like how do OKRs fit with greenfield innovation projects?
Okay, that's a good question. That's also a very common mistake the companies make. Some teams, they use learning as an excuse, right? Sometimes, right? Learning is fundamental, right? It's crucial, but it's a means to an end. Learning is crucial to improve performance, but in the end, if you learn a lot of stuff over 3 years and you didn't improve anything, you failed, right? So you should learn quickly. Use learning as a tool to improve the results. You don't have sometimes people believe that, oh, I have to show revenue in a quarter. That's not the idea. That's why we have outcomes and impact measures. Oh, how would a startup measure traction? Hey, number of users, engagement. Sometimes I have 100 users that love your product. Hey, that's how a startup company would measure, right? So do the same. There's a whole playbook for a startup company to simply bring you to greenfield and do the same thing, right? You just have to explain the exact that you're doing, a longer term investment. As long as you show progress, they will probably understand, right? Oh, the idea is to show revenue in, I don't know, 2 years. So working the 3 horizons concept, usually a good tool here.
Yeah, and again, I think the goal ultimately is to show revenue, right, or some kind of measure of business success. You can walk that back into the kinds of behaviors, the leading indicators that you see today that would indicate that you'll see revenue in the future, and that's really it's similar to the impact mapping exercise that Gothelf does, and some of the stuff that I've been working with teams recently about breaking sort of the KRs down into those leading indicators. So if you're doing greenfield, what is the, what are the behaviors that you would want to see today that would indicate that you might see kind of the more revenue producing or more traction inducing behaviors in the future? That's the good conversation to have, and those become your KRs. Good.
Exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
And usually when an executive that's focused on revenue, what you tell them, if you want to measure revenue every month, you never get Airbnb, you never get Dropbox, you never create Uber. You have to work with the leading indicators, right? So usually this helps them shift. It's about revenue, but maybe down the line, years down the line, usually helps.
Yeah, excellent. We've got 10 more minutes, and so I'm going to try to get through a few more here. OKRs versus roadmaps.
Okay.
How do you reconcile that, right? So everybody has a roadmap. It doesn't matter, right? And so then how do OKRs work in a roadmap-driven organization?
Okay. The idea is that you should transition out of roadmaps, right?
How do you
do
that?
The roadmap is a residue from Waterfall, right?
Yeah.
Just the term roadmap. Oh, there's a road and we have a map for it. That's zero uncertainty. That's not true, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the transition is what I mentioned before. You start talking about outcomes. Okay, this quarter we're going to launch those features, and those are the expected outcomes, right? Because you want to launch the feature there's a business reason behind every feature, right? So you start to measure those outcomes. And then in the next quarter, you can say, hey, we didn't reach it. Because if you actually measure outcomes, you find out every single company found out. There's a great article on Harvard Business Review about it, where Google and Microsoft and Netflix, they usually have a 10 to 20% hit rate on feature ideas. 80% of ideas usually do not work, right? Yeah. So in that environment, how can you do a roadmap? Yeah. You can run experiment ideas, and you start shift the idea towards business outcomes.
Yeah.
Right? So having that conversation is fun.
But when will I get my feature, Felipe? that's
why do right? Why do, usually when you say that, it's because you're seen as a factory, right? The team is not seen as a partner to drive results. The team is, your job is to do things, right? You're a factory, a feature factory. you have to start a conversation and work together with the stakeholders and say, hey, we need to be an actual product team. Let me help your outcomes. And then you create a shared OKR with them. Okay, let's say your marketing or sales or whatever. Let's create a shared OKR, and we're going to work together to improve the outcomes you want. So I will not deliver the feature. I'm going to deliver the outcomes. And we're going to have a joint conversation with you together. In sense response, you talk about orbital model where you have the product team and other functions orbiting around it. It's a similar approach, right? So create a shadow care with them, or at least talk with them about the outcomes. Yeah. And have regular, closer work with them will really help.
I really like, there's a great quote I've been using for at least 5 years from Kent Beck that he tweeted. He tweeted this 5 years ago. Yeah. And he said, roadmaps should be lists of questions, not lists of features. And like, to me, that's the crux of that particular conversation, right? It's not what are we going to ship this quarter, but how are we going to hit our outcome this quarter? And like, how are we trending towards our outcome? And answering those questions, right, about what combination, again, of code, copy, and design will help us hit this particular KR is the conversation to have. It's not an easy conversation, but you can still map that. You can say, look, for this quarter, we are working on this KR, right, or these KRs. And for next quarter, we believe that we'll work on these KRs, but we'll make those assessments as we can move forward. But it's really, it's a difficult conversation to navigate. There's a
technique called outcome-based roadmap, which basically you map over time which outcomes you want to achieve. This is a transition too as well, because hey, how can I know which outcome I will need in a year from now? But it helps if you're really attached to the roadmap term, right? So let's have a roadmap, but for outcome.
Yeah. All right. Let's just change just a little bit different question here in the couple of minutes we have left. So the question here says, look, you recommend that OKRs don't go down to the individual level on product teams using Agile. What about non-product teams? So in this case, I would assume maybe if it's I don't know what a non-product team is meant here, but maybe an HR team or a marketing team. I'm not sure, but what else?
Okay. Lots of companies have abandoned individual OKRs, like Spotify abandoned it. Twitter mostly doesn't have them. The idea is to have a good OKR, I have to have a good metric. And depending on the function and the role, the metric is not individual, the metric is at the team level. For example, let's say a branding team. Right? A branding team usually doesn't have individual metrics, right? Because the whole team is trying to increase brand awareness. Yeah. So it's impossible to create good outcome-based OKRs. So I'll basically be a to-do list. So every time I have an individual metric, I can create an individual OKR. Sales, recruiting, customer success. There are several roles that you can do that. But even so, I would usually recommend not requiring them in the beginning. They should not be required in the beginning. And then afterwards, as your company is more mature, you can decide, which functions can actually have individual OKRs or not.
Got it. All right, time for one more question, and then we're going to wrap up here. And I want to close with this one because I think it's tactical and it can help the organizations kind of start, especially those struggling, to really think through this. So if you have an OKR champion, if you're, forgive me, championing for an OKR champion in your company, in concrete terms, what does an OKR champion do, especially if they're not the boss?
Okay. First of all, they release the boss from having to track OKRs. So usually CEOs, they love that, because the idea of champions is that OKRs should continue even if the boss is in Japan or is in vacation, right? So it should be part of the daily routine. There's studies that show that one of the main reasons that any goal approach fails is that the executives, they shift priorities, right? So if the CEO is the actual champion of OKR, what happens when it has to tackle another challenge? So champions, they free the executives from having to deal with the day-to-day OKR work. They also help avoid the same mistakes over and over again. They help with internal training and support, and they also help raise the bar. Because if you have good champions, they won't let the teams include a to-do list, an initiative in their OKRs, because you're supporting them. So there's several benefits of having OKR champions.
Got it. Got it. And really, and specifically, like, is this, when you've seen this role, is this a product manager typically, or is it like, who is the OKR champion?
OKR champions usually come from several roles. The key characteristics are they're volunteers. They have to be passionate about it. They get things done, and they know how to work to influence, because they won't be anyone's boss, right? Nobody will report to them. So having those three things, it can be almost any role. But of course, if someone that comes with already knows how to work to influence and is already familiar with metrics, is usually better, right? So some good agile coaches are very good at that. Good product managers are very good at that. But I've seen finance people, HR. Usually the best approach is to have several different OKR champions from different functions and supporting, each one supporting a set of teams.
Got it. Terrific. Felipe, thank you very much, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in. A couple of closing things before we wrap up. First of all, Felipe's book, Goals for Agile Teams, comes out early Q2 this year. You can go to senseandrespondpress.com and sign up to find out when it's coming out. We're going to do this again next month for one of our next books on Sense and Respond Press. In this case, the book is called The Case for Change, and we'll be joined by Sonia Krasojevich and Jonathan Bertfield. Really, that webinar is going to be about making the case to your company for building a lean enterprise and driving digital change. And if you want to sign up for that webinar, you can go to bit.ly Case for Change webinar, and you can sign up there, and you rest assured that we will all be tweeting about this in the future as well. Once again, Felipe, thank you very much. This was highly informative. We've got tons and tons of questions, so we can get back to folks with a link to the video, maybe a link to the slides, and answers to many of these questions that didn't get answered on the webinar today. Folks, we look forward to seeing you next month on March 28th with Jonathan and Sonia. Felipe, thanks again, and we'll talk to you all in March.